This session is CFRE approved, as many of them are. 1.0 CFRE credits. At the end of the session, make a note and we will certify your participation. Pretty easy to do so, but that will happen at the end, as I'm sure you can tell. Here's our agenda today. As you can tell, a couple big things here. We'll sort of dive into some of the big trends around direct mail. We'll talk about some tips from me for a successful direct mail campaign. And then we're going to hand the mic over to Josh. So I'm going to tell you about Josh in a second, but he's outstanding and we're really lucky to have him here. And then a question that still someone's going to ask in a few minutes, but yes, the recording and the slides will be sent around later today. All right, so quick intros. I've met a lot of you. My name is Patrick, lucky to be the co-founder and co-CEO of FreeWill, alongside my wonderful friend Jenny. Normally, as I mentioned, living in Miami. Right now I'm in Wisconsin. Jenny's all the way out in Seattle. And we're really lucky to work alongside this beautiful team all around the United States, raising close to $8.5 billion for charity to date, mostly in planned gifts, although a bunch of other things in donor advised funds, stock giving, QCDs, crypto, et cetera. Working with almost 1,400 partners. And so if you are a partner, just want to say thank you. Really love working together with you. And together, our team has more than 4 centuries of combined fundraising experience and expertise, obviously spread out a lot of ways. And so we try to put all that work. And I mention this also because in this webinar, there's been a lot of work by a lot of folks, especially my friend and colleague, Phoebe. Thank you, Phoebe. But I get to talk to you, but obviously the work behind this is from a lot of people. All right, so let's dive in. Well, before we dive in, I just want to tell you that in about 20 minutes, you're going to get to hear from Josh, who is phenomenal. One of my very favorite humans, period. A little bit about Josh. When Josh was in elementary school, he started fundraising, right? For his elementary school, Maple Lane Elementary, which is the cutest thing that I've heard today. And then from 2004 to 2006, he was also a teacher. And so, you know, he later became a fundraising expert, but when you hear from him, you'll hear this sort of teaching cadence and the thoughtfulness that goes into actually helping people learn, as opposed to just Josh himself being really smart. In 2006, Joe took a turn into politics and worked for now President Joe Biden as assistant finance director and continued in that role during Biden's first presidential campaign in 2007, which some of you will remember. And so you can imagine Josh has raised an enormous amount of money in a variety of factors there. From 2004 to 2013, Josh worked for the late Senator Harry Reid, Senate Majority Leader, currently the namesake of the Nevada airport now, and he really mastered donor engagement. And Harry Reid was actually one of the sort of most prolific fundraisers in the Senate. And so there's obviously a ton that he learned, but also some of that prolificness was Josh behind the scenes. In 2013, he helped grow Beau Biden's National Donor Network before Beau Biden passed away. In 2015, he helped establish the Foundation for the Protection of Children. So many of you might not know this organization, but the Beau Biden Foundation for the Protection of Children did a ton of really important work protecting children from child abuse. So really, really amazing work there. Did a bunch of other things. And then more recently, joined the nonprofit storytelling conference, which can't recommend highly enough. And Josh talked a little bit about that. He's big role there. And he's the president of what we call JMA Strategies, which is a fundraising advisory, generally a board member of St. Edmund's Academy. So he's a board member of the school too. So he's in your shoes as well as being in his shoes. And last about Josh, he's just experts in effective donor communication. And that's what you'll really get from Josh today is what are the stories we need to talk about? How do we tell them? I'm so excited to dive in there. He's been a teacher, a barista, a file clerk before a fundraiser. So he's got all this background to bring. And then, we're not going to hear a ton about Josh the human today, but Josh is a runner, a reader, a music lover, a dad, husband. Josh, do you want to say a quick hi before we put you away for 20 minutes and then come back to you?
Yes, of course. Hello, everyone. Great to see so many folks here today. I love direct mail. I love donor communications. And mostly today, I love Patrick and all the things that you do for the sector, buddy. Thank you for having me. Can't wait to dive in with y'all.
Great. All right. We will see you back here in just a few minutes. And he's in Kennett Square, Pennsylvania. So if any of you know where that is, southeastern Pennsylvania, you see Josh around, give him a big hug for us. And then, we love to give some of my favorite books away. And in this case, we're doing it a little bit differently. We're giving away one of Josh's favorite books, which is a book called Creative Deviations. And this book is one of the best books on modern fundraising and storytelling and direct mail, right? So this is a really thoughtful book about how do we tell stories in a great way that compels action. And so we're going to give a bunch of copies of this away. Again, at the end of the session, drop a note in the survey and we will do it. All right, so let's dive in. We asked you all how your week was going. People are feeling pretty good, which is great to see. Generally strong reviews here. How are we doing about hitting our goals this year? A little scared, right? People are down a bit from a few weeks ago, and there's a little bit of pessimism here. And so we're going to talk about some really important strategies, especially as we move into end of year, which I don't want to ruin your summer, but is going to be upon us faster than we think. All right, so let's dive into the future of direct mail so we can get to Josh. There, National Postal Museum, which as you can tell is a little bit of a biased speaker here, talks about there's no such thing as junk mail, only poorly designed and implemented campaigns. Direct mail, when we think about it, can take many forms: postcards, event invites, solicitations, mailers, impact reports, magazines, etc. Right? So these are all counting in the bucket. We're obviously very focused on direct mail and direct response mail today in the fundraising context. So when we asked people like you, and some of this was you, how much of your income comes from direct mail, about half of you said less than 10%. But then you start drifting upwards, and between 10% and a quarter, pretty significant chunk, 26 to 50%, more than half, 10%, and then some folks got basically all of their revenue from direct mail, right? So a much smaller group, but there's certainly some numbers there. And so you can see the sort of divergence here in how different people are thinking about it and how developed this mechanic is. Right? Generally, when we think about direct mail, it does tend to be pretty ROI positive, right? And this is because donors think about direct mail differently than the electronic engagement that they get so much of. 56% of donors think print marketing is the most trustworthy of all the marketing channels. Average ROI is 112%. 67% of people feel mail provides a more personal connection versus the internet. So, you can tell that it can sort of stick in the mind of donors longer. Now, one thing is that people often think, well, younger donors, they don't really care about direct mail. They don't even get mail. And boomers are all about the mail. But you have this sort of overlap, right? I mean, I think that the story of Gen Z behavior and millennial behavior is one of intersecting mediums. And so, these are the folks that are watching TV while interacting on their phone. And when they're getting mail, they're often moving that online. So 39% of boomers, 43% of Gen X, half of millennials, another 38% of Gen Z. These are folks that went to a brand's website. This could be a nonprofit or a for-profit after receiving direct mail, right? So you're seeing this sort of offline to online shift that's really interesting. And part of this is that direct mail is shown to be more memorable than digital campaigns. Now, why is this? We think that having something in your hands without all the other notifications and screens around takes less cognitive effort to process than email, right? Some of you still read tangible newspapers, and maybe you have the same experience I do, where the tangible newspaper is just a different experience than reading the same thing on the New York Times website or whatever your read is, right? And partly it's because our brains have an easier time remembering tactile objects. I think part of it is also there's just less distractions around. So we can hold a singular piece of mail in your hands, you can read it, not all this other stuff is happening. And then it takes up physical space, right? You think about an email you've read, you never see it again. The average mail has a life of 17 days before being tossed in the trash or hopefully recycled, right? And so you have this as sort of an artifact of the campaign. And we're going to talk more about this sort of unique aspect of it in a moment, because this portion of it, where it has more staying power, can actually do real wonders in shifting your whole fundraising strategy. We mentioned it's popular among all age groups, right? The majority of Americans believe mail brings a sense of discovery to their lives. They're excited about getting mail, right? They feel excited to receive mail daily. Boomers and Gen X, but actually millennials are the most excited to receive mail, which is maybe not what you would have predicted. This is from a USPS study, by the way. Millennials are also the most likely to be motivated to give by direct mail, which is, again, is not what you might have expected, but they were still motivated by email, which was true of all ages except boomers, right? So for millennials, we'll talk about this in a second, ends up being a really good 1-2 punch. Now, one of those interesting things, we'll show you in a second, that direct mail is only decline in terms of volume, but it does make each piece stand out a little bit more. When we look at giving channels used by generation, let's go all the way to the right side first, right? So these are our oldest folks. These are pre-baby boomers, silent generation, 1945 and earlier, really about 1945 to about 1929. So silent generation, right? 43% say I use mail, 38% of these folks give online, right? So we're not negating any online giving here. And then social media and text basically doesn't show up. Now we move a little bit younger, right? Boomers, you guys are a little bit younger than those folks. 1946 and 1964, that makes these people, what, 73 to 59 this year, 58, 57, excuse me. And you start to see, okay, male's dripping a bit, down 27%, but still pretty prevalent. Then in this study, it does seem to drop off a bit from Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z. Part of that is a lack of effort towards these folks. Part is a lack of response, right? Really, really interesting. There's some really good questions about checks. I want to get to this in a second because I think this is a really interesting dynamic, right? Direct mail, a strong website is a dynamic duo, right? So again, this intersection ends up being really, really important. 44% of people said they visited a website after receiving postcards. 34% more searched online for the brand. And mail proves your trustworthiness to recipients, but then digital presence proves your validity, right? So like this, it seems legit, and also it seems real, and now I can take action when you combine these two. So this ends up being really important, right? If you don't have a good website, it's undercutting your direct mail. If you don't have direct mail, it probably undercuts visits to your website. So there's this interesting complement here, as I mentioned. Other interesting things to note is that the 2020 and beyond pandemic shifted our relationship, where consumers are now more invested in direct mail, consumers are spending more time reading direct mail, and more affluent households are getting more excited about mail as well. So there's a really interesting dynamic here. But one thing that's happening, and you can see this drop off, right, is that mail volume across the board is going down. And many of you will have noticed this. You know, I remember when I was young, coming home from visiting my grandparents after 4 or 5 days, and the mailbox would be totally jam-packed, right? And that's just not true anymore. You see that the total amount of volume, right, dropped from, say, 2000, 2001 in the peak here, 2005, all the way down to about 60, 50% less than that. You'll get first-class volume. It's moved from 100,000. These are hundreds of thousands, right? So pretty big volume here. I think that's 10 billion to half of that, right? So look at really the ratio is important here. And you see this huge shift, right? So much of bill pay, right? You know, what used to come in the mail? Bill pay, correspondence, right? Reminders, and a lot of this is happening over email, yes, but also text messages in a way that didn't happen previously. So since 2006, which is 3 years before the iPhone comes out, when really we've hit sort of peak internet saturation, and the number of folks who don't have email starts dropping precipitously, you see mail drop precipitously as well. Now, one of the interesting aspects here is that we think, oh, is this the end of the post office? Nope. Post office revenue is going up and up and up. But what we're really talking about is the Postal Service is becoming primarily a package delivery service. Really interesting, right? So the post office, a lot of post offices individually have closed, but generally the USPS is doing pretty well on revenue. And what we see is over time, it's the packages and the e-commerce that's really driving this, right? So the mail service isn't going anywhere, you know, anytime soon, but it's really more and more revenue shifting from letters to packages. So that's interesting to see. Okay, this is a really important point that I think doesn't get discussed enough, but I already saw it noted in the chat, so I'm glad we can address it. Most of you know that there has been a decline in small dollar giving over the last 10 years, right? And sort of gradual shifts, and an increase in major giving. Now, part of that is there's been a decline in direct mail giving. And a lot of it's like, oh, do people talk about, you know, do people still care about mail? And one of the interesting things is whether or not people care about mail, people care a lot less about checks, and they use checks a ton less. Now, checks used to be by far the dominant way of responding to direct mail. And so the slippage of checks may actually be more important than the slippage of direct mail in the overall impact of small dollars and direct mail, right? Check this out. From Yahoo News, 45% of Americans did not write a single check in 2022. Fewer than 15% of Americans say they write several checks a month. And this is a sharp decline among all age groups. So yes, your silent generation, your boomers are more likely to have this, but it's still a very sizable percentage of these folks that haven't written a check in 6 months. The Federal Reserve of Philly even predicted recently that paper checks will be obsolete by 2026. Now, this may or may not be true, but there's certainly a deep downward trend. And this is sort of wild. I had this experience, by the way. I needed to write a check for the apartment I was moving into about a year ago. And I looked in with some degree of horror and embarrassment. And I realized that my mother's name is still on my checks as a sort of co-owner. And it's because the checkbooks that I got when I turned 14 with Wachovia, which has since become Wells Fargo, I got a couple hundred checks and I've never gone through them in the decade since, right? They just, I probably write one check a year maybe, and often less. And that's not an unusual circumstance. And so you see that the death of checks is playing a really big role in how people respond to direct mail. And this is a challenge because we're not used to throwing down $5,000 credit card fees, right? And while our checks could be a little bit bigger. And so this plays a role in the shifting ways that we're giving, which plays a role in the outcomes. And so we'll dive more into this in a little bit. When we think about direct mail fundraising in this year, and we talk to you all about it, well, you say, look, I'm somewhat knowledgeable, right? You see this enormous spike in the 3s and the 4s in terms of how knowledgeable we are, not a ton of very knowledgeable, and then a bunch of folks who are a little bit more unfamiliar. And when we ask you, like, what are the challenges here? Why aren't we better at this? You hear things like, we're unsure if direct mail is worth the cost. It's hard to find the time to personalize letters. We want to make sure we're providing material that triggers a response. We want to provide meaningful results. We want to make sure that we're connecting the right audience with the right story at the right time, right? These are all hard to do, and they're not immediately obvious on how it happens. When we ask you what types of giving do you do direct mail for, by far you see that 95% of you said, oh, we do it for annual giving, right? Really big opportunity there. That's where we get a bunch of our direct response giving. A lot less for major giving. That could be a mistake. We're going to talk about that in a moment. More for planned giving. You could do even more there, although there's been a lot of advancements in digital fundraising around planned giving, which wasn't true 10 years ago. And then about a quarter of folks say we use it for stewardship as well. When we ask you things like, what software do you use here? Number 2 result is nothing, right? Some people use Razor's Edge. Some people use Bloomerang and Salesforce. And then a smaller number of people use things like Constant Contact and Little Green Light. When we ask you, so you can get a sense of what your peers do, how often do you send out direct mail fundraising appeals? This twice a year is really the sort of hotspot. Some folks do annually, some folks do other, right? Sometimes some of those others are never, some of it's other things. About a quarter do it quarterly, which is quite fitting, and about 11% do it monthly, right? So you see the variety of options here and the variety of strategies. When we look at, let's do this, whether folks integrate direct mail with any of their digital marketing strategies, big win here, right? Really good best practices. Half of you say always, 37% say sometimes, right? So we're going to move this sometimes into the always, but this ends up playing a really big role. And Josh is going to talk a little bit more about that, and I'll talk about that as well. When we ask you what the most successful type of direct mail appeal has been, I mean, check this out, right? And people were allowed to pick more than one, which is why these numbers don't add up to 100. But story-driven appeals by far are the most successful here, right? Which is why I'm really glad we've got Josh's storytelling expertise coming up in a second. But story-driven appeals, right? Fact-based appeals don't really work. Event-driven appeals, okay, they'll get event things, but generally these stories are what's gonna move mountains for you. A couple other stats before we get to some tips. Are we currently doing any testing? What we call A/B testing, this or that? Most people say never. 7% say yes regularly. My guess is you 7% are in the much bigger categories of organizations where you have a couple 100,000 people or a couple million to be testing to. But Josh has some really clever ways for smaller organizations to be testing. We'll talk about that in a second as well. And then we ask, what is the average donation amount you receive from a direct mail appeal? And you see a big spike in 50 to 100, a little bit more in 100 to 200, relatively small percentage, good for you all, getting more than $500 per gift. We're going to talk about some ways to drive this up. We got two different strategies. They're both super important that will be quite helpful. What do we prioritize? Well, you can see general response rate, right? Are we getting people to give regardless of the amount? Other big things, ROI, and then average donation amount, right? These are the things that people are really thinking about when they're in your shoes planning direct mail campaigns. All right, so let's talk about what, in my view, is a success for a direct mail campaign. I'm going to pull out a couple of tips that I feel strongly about. I'm going to hand it over to Josh. Hopefully we're in general agreement, but if not, we'll have some good discussion there as well. So the first one, as we mentioned, using channels together. This is cheap. It's very, very effective. It's a great way for detailed storytelling. It's a great way to get back lapsed donors. Digital is ideal for timely communications and instant donations. Hey, there was an earthquake, there was a flood, there's a war, there's this immediate moment. Great for email and text messages very quickly, but we're not doing either or for the most part, right? Send an email a few days after you expect the letter to arrive, and when we reference the letter in an email, this adds heft and importance, right? Remember, people believe that email signals importance, that mail signals importance, and email can lean on the fact that you sent a letter there, right? So you might have a first line in this email, I sent you a letter in the mail, but I'm also emailing because this is so important. Or if you write in the subject line, the letter we sent you yesterday, or the letter arriving soon, who in this group is not going to open that, right? We want to know about the letter that's being reached out to us, because that signals an extra level of closeness and importance, because if you're sending a letter, it must actually really matter, right? That's the way that our brains are working these days. Two, we talked about this with the checks. It is incredibly important that we create easy ways for donors to respond. So a lot of you are using QR codes. This is a really big win. You can also use it for tracking. But remember, QR codes, we're opening QR codes on our phone. So if you can't take payment from a mobile device, fix that, right? If your donation page is really crappy from a mobile device, fix that as well, because this is the way that people are going to be doing it. But the fact that they have their phone in their pocket while they're picking up the mail every time is a really good way to do this, especially in the absence of checks, right? We also want to make sure that we're offering clear instructions in this for alternative ways to give. And by that, we mean the non-cash gifts that are going to be much bigger. So one of the problems in shifting from checks to credit cards is our mental anchor points for what we spend with credit cards is lower, right? Checks are the big investments, the rent, the mortgage, the tuition payment, right? That's what the checks are. Credit cards are the coffee, the dinner, right? An airplane ticket, but not, but we got to watch out for our maximums there. And so suddenly we're anchoring at a lower level, which might be pushing your dollars down. And so giving alternate ways to give there becomes more important than it did 10 years ago when we were still hanging out in widespread check usage. For previous donors, you might want a postage paid envelope, but again, know that not all of these folks are going to be using checks. And we need to make sure we have online ways to give, right? And what I see anecdotally, and I couldn't find data on this, is that donors are getting less excited about writing their credit card numbers in the way they used to, and instead are going to go online and make the donation that way. All right, tip 3. This is the cheapest, fastest, best way, least work to double your direct mail results, right? So do everything that Josh tells you and then do this, and you will be twice as successful. One experiment a few years back at a major hospital ran 2 tests with 60,000 fundraising appeal letters. And for half of them, they used a standard response card. They said, do you want to give 10, 50, or $100? Or you could enter in your own thing, right? For those of you that see, okay, this is the average amount we get, you might be tempted to put this. Now, the second half group, right, the other half, again, totally randomized. This is a research study, said 10, 50, 100, 250, 500. Now what happens? The second version raised twice as much money per letter, right? So they put all the same effort into design, into writing, into the file, into the postage, into the printing. And what did they do? They added this slight change on the reply letter, and they raised twice as much money. And another version worked just as well as the higher one, which was surprising. It said you want to give 10 or 500 or type in your own stuff or enter in your own stuff. And so what we're learning here is the high amounts really, really, really matter. This is not the same as raising all the amounts, because if you take away that $10 or $20 option, someone who can only give that amount is going to say, oh, this isn't for me. I'm embarrassed to be writing in 20 when your lowest option is 200. And so I'm just going to skip it. But having this broad range, or even it doesn't have to be that many quantities, but the top one has to be pretty big, will drive really big outcomes, right? So every direct mail campaign you do, I want you to double check this card so you're not leaving half of the money on the table by anchoring your donors too low. Okay, so really, really, really important. All right, tip 4. So that's the cheapest, easiest win here, right? Just anchor that a bit higher. All right. This is another thing that I really love, and I see a couple people do it, but I want all of you to be doing it, especially with the thing I'm going to show you on the next slide. So we want to ask donors to keep the message, right? One of the key elements of direct mail is that it's held for much longer than digital outreach, right? I sent you an email inviting you to this event. You read it, maybe you came based on the fact that you're here, but you're never going to go back and see that again, right? We're going to use the advantage of direct mail to really help change behavior. So if you have a guide to different areas of giving to your university, for example, right, keep this as a reference point, right? Please keep this message for future reference. Once someone reads the thing and you ask them to do this, they'll do it, right? Donors just don't do the things you don't ask for, but they tend to be really receptive to the organizations they love to do the things they do ask for. And so one example that I want to share with you, which is a little bit different than your typical direct mail work. If you want to really crush your giving goals this year, you know, and we've talked about this separately, that organizations that focus on non-cash giving, including stock, including QCDs, including DAFs, including other things, right, donor advised funds, even real estate and planned gifts, these organizations grow 6 times faster than other organizations. Right? Why is that? They're just getting larger gifts from the same people. And there's an anchor point. When I think about my assets, I feel wealthier and I give more. Right? So this really, really matters. But a lot of people ask, well, how do I actually get them to do this? And there's one tactic that strongly recommend you do before the end of year. In the fall, which is September to early November, before end of year giving, send a piece that looks like this. It's called the Permanent Giving Guide. It can be a letter or a brochure, but you don't have to get fancy or complicated, right? You can write the letter, put your letterhead on it, put it in an envelope, send it to your top donors, and you want to ask them in the process to hold it for future reference, right? What does that look like? This document, this letter, explains the benefits of stock giving. It explains qualified charitable distributions. It explains donor advised funds. Now we're going to process this better on paper than we do in email. You should still email about this stuff, but we want to have this as a reference point. And we probably want to send to all existing donors who've given more than, say, $100. Now you might want to push that up or down, but for existing donors who already care about you, we know that shifting the way they give is the #1 fastest way to dramatically drive up their giving. And so if we give them this reference point that they keep, right, and it's going to cost less than $1 per letter to do this, for your $100 plus donors, suddenly we're going to dramatically push up our average gift over the years, right? And one thing that we love here is we're going to say, keep this in reference for any of your giving, not just to my organization, right? So if you're Fordham University in the Bronx, right, you're getting gifts from your alumni, but you're also, those alumni are also giving to their church or their synagogue. They're giving to the local Boy Scout group, right? They're giving to their favorite museum. And now they say, oh, well, this is really important for all of my giving, But whenever they're thinking about giving, they're going back to this thing with a giant Fordham logo on the top and remembering to think about you as well, right? So this is $1 per piece, 50 cents per piece in this letter, and yet it's going to have enormous impact on your long-term giving success. Now, you're not going to get a ton of direct responses immediately, but the next time they're giving, they're going to start shifting this, and you're going to start getting much bigger gifts. So this is probably the up your top amount, and this one are the two of the can't miss tips in terms of how you're going to shift strategy going forward. Some of you are familiar with our little tool we call Willy, which is the FreeWill created free artificial intelligence tool. And so totally free. It's at willy.freewill.com. I'll show you that in a second. And we built a new template last night that will automatically generate this email custom to your organization. So feel free to go use that and go take it. And hopefully you're going to have pretty outsized results this end of year. So check out willy@freewill.com to do that. And that should be really useful. All right, so with that, I'm going to hand it over to my dear friend Josh. I'm going to stop sharing my own screen. I'm going to invite Josh to share his. Welcome, Josh.
Hello.
Josh, about 20 minutes, and then we're gonna bang away at a couple of questions. Maybe, Josh, we're going to give you like 16, 17 minutes. That way we'll get everyone in under the wire.
I'll fly through. I'll fly through. I'll skip the part about how I skip the part where I tell you all how much I love FreeWill. That when I was at the Bo Biden Foundation, we were one of the first few nonprofits to sign up with FreeWill, and what Patrick and his team have done over the last few years. Well, I said I was going to skip it, so I'll just finish. Absolutely phenomenal. Thank you for all that you guys do. And thanks for having me here today. I'm excited to talk about direct mail. I got a couple of slides here. If I can get, there we go. Oops. Okay, so we're going to talk about direct mail. I want to first just frame this as when I talk about direct mail, I'm talking about direct response fundraising. So direct response fundraising is sort of based on the direct response mail that was pioneered in the 30s and 40s and 50s, how to get people to take action through the mail. So these are short sentences, sort of direct asks, being very clear, and not sort of what some nonprofits do, which is just send a letter full of all the things that they're doing and asking people to make a gift. So direct response fundraising is a little bit different way of writing maybe than we're used to in the nonprofit world. So what makes a good direct mail program? I'm going to run through this pretty quickly here, but there's sort of three components to a good direct mail program in terms of like the vehicles, the pieces of mail that you're sending folks. First are powerful asks. These are sort of your fundraising letters, your annual fund letter, your year-end appeal, maybe a back-to-school appeal or a fiscal year-end appeal. But they have to be powerful asks. And I have a couple of principles that I'm sharing here for each one. I won't read them. You guys can take screenshots or take a look at the slides. I just want to highlight one thing that's the most important in each one of these, the story. What story are you telling when you're asking a donor to make a gift in your powerful asks? Oh, it says I'm not in presenting mode. Does that mean you can't see my screen? Better?
Perfect. Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, great. So when you're asking donors to make a gift, the most important part of the story that you tell is that it's not complete, is that you're telling a story of something that's going on, a beneficiary that needs help, a problem that your organization is facing or that your organization is solving, but the end is not, you're not sharing the end of the story. You're not sharing the success that happens because a donor makes a gift. So what that might look like is if you're an organization like when I was at the Bo Biden Foundation, raising money to protect children from abuse, you tell a story of a child who is in danger and who needs help. This was great fundraising in the pandemic when people were sheltering in place, children were sheltering in place with predators, and they had no way to escape. You tell the story of a child who's living in a home with a predator and they need help right now and they can't get it. Donor, will you please make a gift to protect this child? That's an incomplete story. What nonprofits often do is they say, here's the thing that happened. There's children who are living in dangerous situations and we help them. And will you send us a gift to help us keep doing what we've already done? That's very organization centric and not as much focused on the beneficiary who needs help at that point. I hope that makes sense. Here's my little bonus tip. When you're writing fundraising letters, use the present tense. There is a child right now. There is a family right now There is land in our community that needs to be protected and preserved, not in the past tense. There was a child who needed help and we helped him. Will you help us do more? The second part of a good direct mail program is promptly thanking. There was some comments in the chat about what industry best practices are around thanking. Industry best practices are that you're thanking within the first 48 hours of receiving the gift. That's aspirational. Most of us, I would imagine, would struggle to turn thank you notes around in 48 hours or even have enough gifts to warrant spending the time to thank within 48 hours. So aim for that. If it's a week, that's fine too. What matters when you're thanking promptly is that mostly that you're letting the donor know that their gift was received. We talked a lot about the difference in giving over generations, and folks who are giving online may not know if their gift was received. Folks who are sending their check through the mail may not know if their gift is received and if the check is cashed. So you want to, until they look at their bank statement, right? So you want to make sure you're letting them know that you received it. And that it's being used. That's the other question that donors have in their minds when they send a contribution is it being used for what you told me it was being used for? So I always suggest that folks say, your gift is at work right now. Here's what we're doing with it. And that's when you're using, again, the present tense. Your gift is right now out in the field helping feed families. Your gift is right now helping protect children from child abuse. Here's a little bonus tip. I think I pulled a example. I think that everybody should send a reply device along with a thank you note. If you can include a reply card that says my next gift, you'd be surprised you can raise 5% more. It's hard. A lot of organizations don't like asking for a gift when they're thanking. If you just slip a little reply card in there, you're not actually asking, as long as the letter is doing all of the thanking. The third part of a direct mail program is what I call regular reporting. These are your 4-page or 6-page or 8-page newsletters that are donor focused. These are not sort of your annual reports or things like that. These are donor focused. Here's what your gift did. When you're reporting this way, you're showing the donor what their gift made possible, the transformation that occurred in the life of your beneficiaries or for your organization that your organization brought around. And we do that in a couple of different ways through these newsletters that I've talked about, or donor reporting letter, which is something we can talk about in Q&A if folks are interested in learning more about that. That's sort of the thing that donors want to know after they've been thanked is what did their gift do? And so you're telling them a story of what their gift did, and it's that sort of completed story. A little typo here. I'll change this in the slides that I share with you, Patrick. You should be using the past tense, not the present tense. That's a copy and paste error there. So those are sort of the 3 components to a good direct mail program. What I'm going to share next is sort of what are the pieces in there. I can skip through this pretty quickly. We sort of talked about them already. You have fundraising appeals, you have newsletters or donor reporting letters, you have your email and social media, which, as we've talked about already, sort of supports all of these things. If you're sending a fundraising letter, you should send 2 or 3 or 4 emails for each of those letters. If you're sending a newsletter or donor reporting letter, you definitely want to echo the content in that in an email as well. So just pause and say one quick thing. Presumably when you're sending your fundraising letters, your newsletters and donor reporting letters, you're just sending that to people who you have mailing addresses for, right? But there's, I would imagine, a lot more people on your list for whom you have emails, but not mailing addresses. So that's why it's important to use your email list to support your fundraising and your reporting. There's also sort of special campaigns that you might use when you're in a good, robust direct mail program. These are donor surveys, legacy gift appeals, monthly donor recruitment campaigns that still work great through the mail. I think they work a little bit better online now than they ever have, but they certainly work well through the mail. And gift catalogs. I'm on a huge gift catalog kick, folks. I pulled one out from a friend of mine. Support Our Scholars based in Orlando, Florida. Their gift catalog is fabulous. If you haven't heard about gift catalogs, we can talk about that in Q&A, but I think they're fabulous. They're a great way to raise money around year end, and it doesn't really feel like fundraising to your donors.
Josh, very quickly, do you want to just talk a minute now about gift catalogs? Because I've heard you be really excited about this, and I think it's a newer concept to a lot of these folks.
Yes, I would love to dive into gift catalogs. So here's what a gift catalog is. I'll show it again a little bit more slowly. It's basically a 4-page newsletter with a front page, and then on the inside are items that your donor can select and sort of buy, right? They're outcomes typically of your programming. So in the case of Support Our Scholars, they're such a fabulous organization. They provide like not scholarship money, but sort of everyday dollars for young women who are going to college, often the first in their family to go to school. And they got a scholarship to go to, let's say, University of Alabama, but they don't have any money for textbooks. They don't have any money to get home. And so Support Our Scholars provides them, scholarships and extra dollars for those things. So in their gift catalog, you can buy textbooks for one semester. You can buy textbooks for a full year. You can make a gift to support groceries, to provide the girls groceries for 1 month, counseling services, plane tickets home, tutoring lessons. And so these are all outcomes of the programs that Support Our Scholars runs. And they're asking donors in a gift catalog around the holidays to buy these things for their scholars. It's fabulous. Any organization that does sort of international relief, I think should have a gift catalog. Anytime the programs that you run create really life-changing outcomes for your donor, for your beneficiaries, a gift catalog would work great. One other thing about gift catalogs, because they're sort of, gifty kinds of things, families will sit together and sort of pick out things to give to loved ones for the holidays. So if you mail this in the beginning of November, it doesn't feel like fundraising. It doesn't feel like the same thing that you'll be sending donors around Thanksgiving for your year-end appeal. They are fabulous, and they work great online as well. They work great for sort of little Facebook or social media posts as well, and they're just tremendous. Good. Talk more about that if folks have questions. I'm not super great, my friends, at watching the chat while I'm also presenting. I haven't gotten that.
You're doing great. There's 1,300 people here, so you're not going to answer the questions in the chat and get us out of here before sunset.
All good, all good. The last thing I'll say, the other important piece of a good, robust direct mail program is that you are communicating with your major donors through the mail. If you're at an organization that has major gift officers, that's great, who have people who have time to take care of and manage relationships one-on-one with major donors. If not, you can absolutely be using your direct mail to raise major gifts. I just suggest that you treat those packages a little bit differently. Include a cover letter with a fundraising appeal. Put the fundraising letter or the newsletter in a 9x12 envelope instead of folding it, hand address it, put a little stamp, a hand applied stamp, paper clip a cover letter to the appeal or to the newsletter so that it feels different when the donor opens it. You can feel the paper clip in there. Anything you can do to make those packages stand out for your major donors will definitely help in the long run. All right, so what does a robust direct mail program look like month by month? I'm not going to walk through this entirely, folks. You can take a look at this in the replay or download the slides. This is a pretty aggressive schedule. For those of you who are at smaller or medium-sized organizations, you may not have the capacity to do basically 10 or 12 appeals or 10 or 12 pieces of direct mail in a year. That's great. Do what you can. Generally speaking, I suggest you have one newsletter or donor reporting letter for every 2 appeals that you send. So if you're sending 3 or 4 appeals every year, I would have at least 2 reporting letters or newsletters. And that just sort of reminds the donor that you're not just asking them all the time, that you're sharing stories of success and what their gift has done. So I'll highlight one other quick thing here. I think if you have a spring gala, if you have any kind of gala or golf outing or any sort of event fundraising, one of the things we learned in the pandemic when so many events were canceled is you can use direct mail to raise money as if it were an event. So if you have your spring gala, you might have 250 or 500 people in your community coming. If you're an organization that has donors around the country or many more donors than that, you should absolutely be taking the thing that you're asking donors to do at that gala and put that in a direct mail letter and send it to the people who aren't likely to come to your event. It could be a great way to squeeze out some extra revenue. When you're already working on a fundraising event, it's sometimes hard to have the time to do that, but I think it's a super helpful way. The principle here with this calendar, this aggressive calendar, is that you never want to go dark on your donors. The more you're communicating with your donors, the better. The more frequently you're in communication with them, the more likely they are to make a gift. A colleague of mine relays a great story of Meeting a friend once a year for coffee and sort of catching up, and then hearing from them out of the blue saying, hey, could you help me with this project? A person is a lot less likely to want to help if they're not hearing from someone so often. We're a lot more likely to want to help those people who we communicate with regularly, who are close personal friends of ours. So the more you're in touch with your donors, the better off you are, the more likely they are to make a gift when you're asking. All right, next slide. Oops. Take a breath. That is a very big, very aggressive calendar. So don't worry if you can't get through all of it. I'm going to run through a quick recipe for a good fundraising letter and then share. Let me skip the quick recipe because I'll highlight these things in the fundraising letter I'm about to share. My friends and I wrote a book called The Golden Appeal that sort of walks through this recipe. Check it out at goldenappealbook.com. I think it's like $5 for shipping, but the book is free. So let me stop my share and pull up an example of a pretty good fundraising letter here. Okay, this is for a client of mine called The Way Home. They're a prison reentry organization. They help men who are getting out of prison in Sussex County, Delaware, find housing, find job, get a car, that sort of stuff. So here are the key principles of a direct mail fundraising letter. You want to get to the point really fast, really fast. If you're not getting to the point and letting the donor know what you're asking them to do in the first paragraph or two, most people are going to put the letter down. So in the first paragraph, we say, as you prepare for the holidays, I hope your heart is full and your mind is at peace. I'm writing to you today to ask you to share that peace of mind with the man being released from prison. I'm writing you today too, and let the donor know what you're asking them to do. Let me explain. This holiday season, Sean is being released from prison. When he gets out, he'll be homeless during one of the coldest times of the year. In the fourth paragraph, we're asking them to make a gift. Will you send in a special year-end gift today to give Sean a safe place to stay while he gets back on his feet? That's in the fourth paragraph. It's not buried way down at the end of the letter, right? On the back page that nobody's going to read, because you've spent the first 6 paragraphs talking about all the great things that you've done this year and the number of volunteers you had out in the community and the number of successful fundraising events that you had and all of the programs and people that you helped. Right away, we're getting to the point and letting the donor know that there's a problem that they can solve. Let's see. So then the other key ingredient in any direct response fundraising letter is to give a deadline. And so we're highlighting the deadline. It's super easy at year end to have a really clear deadline, December 31st. It's a little bit harder at other times of the year, but any day that ends in a Y can be a great deadline. So then the letter continues here. We're telling a story of Sean, what his life was like, what his life could be like without the donor's generosity, without the donor stepping in and making a contribution. Your gift will give Sean the comfort of laying his head down in a place with available food and someone to turn for help. That's the hopeful future, the thing that will happen when a donor makes a gift. Oh, this should be indented. Moving down to the next page, here's a great little tip. Oh, it's not actually right. If you're able to in your direct mail fundraising, to have the line, to have a sentence, have the page flip in the middle of a sentence, that's great. It'll get people reading down to the next one, to the next page, have them flip over. So what we're doing here is, as the letter continues, you're asking again and again, 3 or 4 times over the course of the letter, you're reminding the donor that their gift is urgently needed and asking them to make a gift. You also want to highlight that when you're telling a story like this, let me come at this issue this way. A lot of people say, I can't tell a story that's about a specific person or a specific beneficiary and the help that they need in a direct mail letter because those funds will be designated for this particular program. They won't be undesignated funds. There's a great way in direct response fundraising to make sure that the money you raise is undesignated. When you say something like, you'll love knowing your gift will support all the work of insert your organization's name. That way, you can tell a specific story of a man, in this case, who needs help, but also raise money for the rest of your programming and sort of let the donor know that it will go to all of the work that you guys do. One last quick point. Yes, Jessica, it's great to do more than 1 page. Most successful fundraising letters are 2 or 4 pages. One page, donor will spend about 7 seconds before they decide to put it down. If it's a 2-page letter, they'll spend about 14 seconds before they decide to put it down. If it's a 4-page letter, they'll spend 28 seconds before they decide to put it down. So the longer the letter, the more time a donor will spend with it. Here's the last tip that I'll give in writing a good direct response fundraising letter. You want to perfectly summarize what the letter is about, what the problem is, and what the donor's gift will do, and if you can, the deadline. In the PS, because the PS is one of the most read parts of a letter. In the highlight, some people call it a Johnson box, I call it a headline. That should perfectly summarize what the donor's gift will do, what the deadline is. In this case, it's what the deadline is. And in your emphasis, in your bolding, in your underlining, a donor should be able to read only the underlined parts of this letter and know exactly what they need to do. Will you send in a special year-end gift today to give Sean a safe place to stay while he gets back on his feet? You can imagine how much harder it is for a man just out of prison, especially around the holidays. Your gift will give Sean the comfort of laying his head down in a place with available food and someone to turn for help. I know exactly what the letter is about just by reading those sentences. I know exactly what I need to do. And hopefully the donor wants to make a gift. So that's a quick run through of the letter. Am I okay on time, Patrick? We got 5 minutes. Let me just jump very quickly back to my PowerPoint.
Yeah. Tell us for a second about, give us a minute on the Nonprofit Storytelling Conference. And then
Absolutely. So the Nonprofit Storytelling Conference, folks, I went to the Nonprofit Storytelling Conference when I was in your shoes, when I was a frontline fundraiser, struggling to raise nonprofit money, having been a political fundraiser for so long. And I discovered that there's this way to raise money that's based on stories, that's based on problems that your organization is solving for people. And I fell in love with the conference. 3 years later, I was working for the conference. It's that transformative. Thank you, Daria, for loving the conference as much as I do. Here's why it's great. You'll connect with other storytellers. We're an in-person conference, which is maybe not sort of what most folks are doing these days. When there is so many incredible free resources out there, there's something special about being in the room, sitting shoulder to shoulder with people who are making change in their communities in the same way that you are. The Nonprofit Storytelling Conference is also great because we teach people how to do things. You don't walk away just with a notebook full of ideas. You walk away with plans that you can put into action. And sometimes you've already started putting those plans into action before you've left the conference. And finally, you'll learn how to grow your nonprofit and become the talk of your town. Folks, we have a new tool we're unveiling this year at the conference called the Viral Campaign Builder. You can find out about it at the conference's website, npstory.com. But the Viral Campaign Builder, I think, is going to really change the way a lot of folks grow their donor base, get more known in their community. And it's super awesome. I got a free book for you if you want it. Okay to share this right now, or do you want me to?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay.
Hey, actually,
nonprofitstorytellingconference.com/FW-book. This book, The Story Prompts for Nonprofits, my colleague Chris Davenport wrote and created. It is amazing. It's got more than 900 storytelling prompts that will help you. Well, one of the things people always say is, I don't know what story to tell. I don't have any stories in my organization. You absolutely do. And this book will help you find it. All you do is you open the book. Right here, I got it. It's free. It's a free download. You can buy a hardbound book or bound book. You figure out pick what kind of organization you are, what kind of work you do, and then there are a series of prompts that will help you get your creative juices flowing, and find and tell and create a story, craft a story in literally minutes. It's just amazing, and it's free.
That's great. Awesome. With that, my colleague Phoebe is actually going to drop a note in the chat. So please take that 30-second survey. Couple of things in there. One, access to this book. So Josh will follow up with everyone that asks for it and shoot you an email with the ebook. So that's a great way to avenue. Josh, if you don't mind taking your screen down, I'm going to share very quick things to close us out. Let's do this. So a couple of quick resources on top of that book. The Creative Deviations book that we talked about earlier. So if you drop a quick note in the survey, we'll be able to send that to you as well. So that's exciting. And then at Thursday at noon for anyone that wants to join. So in 2 days, in 47 hours, we're going to do a quick deep dive on planned giving websites. So I will hang out with you all at noon Eastern in 2 days. And there's a very quick very quick question in the survey as well, where you can RSVP for this. So you'll get a look at some of our new gift annuity calculators, some other stuff like that. But really thinking about this sort of combination of your website along with everything else. This will be about half an hour, and it should be pretty fun. So join us there. And with that, I think the other thing I want to note is that I feel like I'm ruining everybody's summer by letting you know the end of year is coming up quickly. And in 2 weeks, right after Labor Day, we're going to do a session on 5 strategies to reach end of year fundraising goals in 2023. So if you want to join that, we'd love to have you. We'll send you an invite for that as well. But generally, I think, have a lot of takeaways from what Josh shared. I thought that letter was outstanding and a really great model for other things. It also makes me think that we should, there's about 190 questions that we did not get to in the chat. And so, Josh, maybe we chat about doing this again in October, November, and diving a bit deeper, because we probably could have gone for another 3 hours on all this topic. And
we could have. And folks, if you have very specific questions, shoot me an email, josh@nonprofitstorytelling.com. Happy to respond to anything that I can. Obviously, won't be able to get to everything super quickly, but happy to if you have very specific questions. And I'll just say one quick thing, Patrick. I know you want to wrap up, but folks, I saw on the chart that 75% of you, roughly 75% of folks are not asking as often maybe as you should. You're leaving money on the table if you're not regularly communicating with your donors. So fire off a quick email asking folks to make a gift if you don't have time to do the full direct mail. But ask. Donors won't give if you're not asking, and they want to give. Your donors love you as much as you love you. So make sure you're asking.
That's awesome. All right. So first, huge thank you to everyone that came today. We know that you're pretty busy. We know it's August, so you shouldn't even be working, but you're here anyway, learning, advancing your careers, advancing your organization. And then just an enormous shout out to Mr. Josh Alcorn. Always a joy to talk to you, and so much nicer to have you teaching this whole community. So big thank you. If you haven't already, please fill out the survey. That will help you get both books we talked about and a bunch of other information. So hit that up and have a wonderful rest of your summer until we talk to you. And hopefully we'll talk to you Thursday, and then we'll talk to you again in 2 weeks after the unofficial end of summer. So have a wonderful week. Great to see everybody, and talk to you all soon.